by candlelight, I suppose, in the cheap erotic fashion of young men with cheap erotic minds.
Mother, please.
And then what? After supper music?
In the early 20th century, when filmmaking was coming into its own, horror films were mostly dominated by monster movies. Vampires, werewolves and aliens, etc. were the only source for audiences who wanted a good scare. All that changed in the 1960s with the birth of the modern slasher that took a film premise away from the supernatural and gave the viewer a very real threat. Arguably the film that started this popular trend was Psycho, 1960, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, written by Joseph Stefano, and based upon a novel written in 1959 by Robert Bloch. The story of Psycho starts off with a young woman, Marion Crane, having an affair with a very nice young man, Sam Loomis, during her lunch break. Whilst at work for a real estate company, she makes off with $40,000 that a client dropped off. She gets a new car and stops off at the Bates Motel where she meets Norman Bates. During a conversation over dinner, she discovers that Norman lives a very concealed life. He has no friends, takes care of the motel that has very few customers, and looks after his mother. The only other contact he seems to have is with the dead birds that he stuffs as a hobby. One trend that Psycho started off was the art of main character misdirection, which was used in further horror films such as the original Friday the 13th. For the first half an hour, the plot centres around Marion, who is played by Janet Leigh. With Marion stealing the money, presumably with the motive of starting a new life with her boyfriend, she realises that she's done wrong and vows to return the money the next day. However, what the audience didn't expect was that she would be murdered in the very next scene in one of the most infamous sequences ever put on film. Dubbed as the shower scene, the sequence proved to be terrifying for audiences and earned Psycho a place in cinema history. With the main character dispatched, the rest of the movie follows Norman Bates. Psycho set itself apart from other horror pictures of that era by dealing with psychological issues and sexual repression by portraying the character of Norman Bates as the innocent party. Due to the impeccable performance by Anthony Perkins, the character initially comes across as quite sweet and a little bit desperate for company. He invites Marion into the office for dinner with an unsettling eagerness because he likes her and that has unforeseen consequences. This scene reveals a lot more about Norman's damaged state of mind, but he doesn't come across that he might be a threat. He's just a boy defending his mother. The film differs from the novel in certain aspects. The character of Norman Bates is portrayed in the novel as a middle-aged, overweight, balding man, but the decision to make him younger and more handsome was to make the audience sympathise with him. That's where Anthony Perkins came in. Up until that point, he'd already had a career in film for about 7 years. He'd starred in westerns and comedies and was mostly considered for the romantic leads. Psycho was his first horror picture and paved the way for a successful career. Another aspect that made the film so successful was its infamous score that was written by Bernard Herrmann. It is generally considered that the all-string composition and the black and white cinematography complemented each other and provided tension and suspense for the film's pivotal scenes. With a budget of just under $1 million, Psycho 1960 made $50 million at the box office. However, due to inflation, that figure is now $592.6 million.
And that's a scene from a most curious film, a virtual, shot-by-shot remake of Alfred Hitchcock's classic thriller Psycho that he made in black and white in 1960. This new film, by the well-respected independent filmmaker Gus Van Sant, who directed My Own Private Idaho and Drugstore Cowboy, as well as last year's big hit, Good Will Hunting, may have been a fruitful exercise for him in film scholarship, shooting it in color, and recreating camera angles, but it plays as just weird for those who know the original.
In the last few decades, there have been a few callbacks to this horror masterpiece, such as the TV movie Bates Motel in 1987, and then a TV series of the same name which started in 2013 and came to an end in 2017. But the most abhorrent of all of these imitators is the remake that came in 1998. Imagine Psycho in colour with new actors and the same lines.
Speak! Fuck! Good boy.
And that's basically the remake. I don't know what Gus Van Sant was thinking when he thought it would be a good idea to remake Psycho shot for shot. Normally when a director takes over a remake, they want to be faithful to the original but also put their own mark on the film. Sometimes a blend of the old and the new can be quite nice, but instead what we get this time around is a bizarre blend of two different eras. I'm guessing that the remake takes place in the 90s given the appearance of computer monitors and printers in the background of Marion's office. However, a lot of the costume design and even the decor is lifted straight out the 60s and 70s. Even the Bates Motel doesn't get much of a makeover and looks similar to the original set, but then I believe that was the point. If it was a bad decision to do this movie shot for shot, then casting Vince Vaughn in the role of Norman Bates is just condemning this film to the deepest, darkest circle of video hell. I've only ever seen Vince Vaughn in shit comedies, and so seeing him in this important role is just jarring. It's obvious that he's seen the original and he's just doing a poor imitation of Anthony Perkins' performance, and that does throw up one very important question in regards to the making of this film. Why weren't the actors given a bit more freedom to make the characters their own? Everyone knows that it's not just about the character on the page, it also takes a great actor to bring the character to life and applies some of their own unique traits to make the character more believable. According to some accounts, Anthony Perkins was a shy man and therefore brought some shy and awkward qualities to his portrayal of Norman, making the character more interesting. You see? Instead, all we have to work with is a high school jock having a crack at some amateur dramatics, and it's really cringy to sit through. The remake does have some additions, otherwise it would just be out and out plagiarism, but sadly the stuff that they do add is either pointless or creepy in a bad way. The pointless stuff amounts to the random flashes of random imagery during the murders of Marion and Arbogast, but the creepiest part of the creepy stuff added is hard to watch. I think you all know what I'm referring to.
Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows, only time.
I know sexual repression was a major theme in the original, but due to the era, the aspect was more in between lines or subtext. Norman peeping through the office wall while Marion changed showed that he was interested in her, and it had the same quality of a hormone-driven teenager peeping in the girls' changing room to catch his first glimpse of boob. In the original, he peeps and then places the picture back on the wall. What I didn't need from the remake is an additional shot of Norman masturbating. That just makes his character darker and less sympathetic, and I didn't like him after that. It's just sinister. There's absolutely no way Hitchcock could have shown something like that in 1960 if a flushing toilet on screen was considered a controversy, but even if he could, I don't think he would have chosen to go down that road. He knew that Norman needed to be seen as a sympathetic and mentally beaten down character who's manipulated into covering up the crimes of Mother, so having him jacking it while he peeps is just mega creepy.
You eat like a bird.
You would know, of course.
Not really. Anyway, I hear that the expression, eats like a bird, is really a falsity. Because birds really eat a tremendous lot. I don't really know anything about birds.
Got some real shit for y'all. Y'all motherfuckers been waiting a long time for this motherfucker.
Marion's boyfriend Sam is played in the remake by Viggo Mortensen, whose overly absurd southern accent makes it difficult to understand what he's saying, combined with Julianne Moore whispering Lila's lines. Even the subtitles are filled with question marks. William H. Macy played the ill-fated private detective Milton Arbogast, and his performance was probably the least offensive. I personally would have loved to see him in the reanimated sequel that never got made. William H. Macy is the undead president of the United States. Look me in the eye and tell me that wouldn't have been cool. Psycho 1998 had a budget of $60 million and took in a hilarious $37.1 million at the box office. On top of that, the film was met with mostly negative reviews, with many calling it pointless, and even though it was a shot-for-shot remake with basically the same script and a few extras added on top, the remake was largely considered inferior to the original. In summary, it just goes to show that perfection doesn't need to be remade, and the prospect of a remake to Psycho possibly outdoing the original is just mad. But hey, we all go a little mad sometimes. Sorry, couldn't resist.
Mega faggot.